welcome back to my channel. Hope you're doing well. As you can see, today we're doing another alphabetical order series video. I know that this series is very slow moving, but I promise you, I'm not going to give up on it, even if it takes me like 5 years or something to complete. I'm gonna do it. So for the letter C, I'm drawing Catra from the new She-Ra, not the old She-Ra. Haven't seen the old She-Ra. But also between this and Voltron, it makes me wonder how many 80s cartoons are going to get rebooted. But anyways, I'm drawing Catra from the She-Ra reboot. From the moment I watched the show, Catra was just my favorite, which is funny because I never really like the villains all that much. Like, I like them, but they're never my favorite character. But I just adore Catra. I love her. I'm not gonna lie, kind of worried about her. I'm afraid she's gonna go with Zula instead of Zuko, but we'll just have to see. Also, I will say that this video was spoiler-free, aside from this costume change, but I don't think that's a big deal. So I'm not going to be talking about spoilers in this story, and I'm hoping that you guys won't spoil anything in the comments for anyone who wants to watch it, because season 4 just came out and we're all just barely alive. But don't worry if you haven't seen the show and you're planning on it. I'm not going to be talking about the show a whole lot, honestly. I'm going to be talking mostly about this drawing, so hope you're cool with that. But yeah, speaking of the drawing, I am in love with the way that this turned out. I am so proud of how this one turned out, which is always a nice feeling. There are definitely some struggles in this drawing, but I think that I made something pretty neat. I really wanted to come up with a pose that suited Catra, and I think that I did a pretty good job with that. I think that the pose is pretty rad. Before I film any video of mine, really, I always do a couple of thumbnail sketches. Like whenever it's speed paint, I always do some thumbnail sketches before I film, so I just have a better idea of what I'm going to be drawing. And all of the thumbnails were kind of in this general range of things. Like I had the same feel where she was like crouching down, doing like a little thing, because she's a cat. This was just the one that I liked the most. This is the one that I thought was the best, so that's the one that I picked. For some reason, parts of this pose were just really giving me a hard time. Like, I draw poses like this somewhat often, like not super often, but often enough to where you would think I would know what I'm doing. But I don't know, both the right arm and the right leg will like, alright, her left, I think. The leg that's farther behind and the arm that's in the front. Those are the ones that were giving me a hard time. I think in the end I got the arm to look okay. I'm still not super satisfied with the leg though. I just think that the foot is at a slightly wrong angle, and the positioning of the arm definitely isn't helping that, but overall, I'm kind of happy with it. This did kind of remind me of certain things that I need to practice while I'm drawing though, because the back leg is a little bit foreshortened, which is something I need to practice on, because I think if I was a little bit more skilled with foreshortening, I could have gotten the leg and the foot to look a little bit right. And also feet. I think at this point I'm fairly decent at drawing hands. Like, I'm not fantastic, but I draw hands in most of my drawings because I mostly just draw people. Catra doesn't wear shoes, and shoes are something that I'm really good at, and feet are something that I'm less good at. Because whenever I draw a person, they're usually wearing shoes because I love designing characters and stuff and like clothing for them to wear. So they usually have shoes, so I studied a lot of shoes in the past, but I haven't done a whole lot of feet studies. I think, again, in the end I got them to look okay, but I think the main issue was her toenails because they're made to look kind of like claws.
Her toenails are so long!
But because of the positioning of the feet and the hands, I couldn't make them look like claws. But I hope it's okay. I also struggled a little bit with the hand right next to her face because it's a hand, but also, like, I wanted it to be kind of in like a, you know how when people imitate like a claw or like a cat claw, they do that thing with their hands, you know the thing. I was trying to do that, but since I don't draw those hands like at all, I kind of had a hard time with it. I think that like my main issue is that it looks too loose. I draw a lot of like flowy things, but then for this like hand pose, it's something that you would want to be stiff, but I'm always so focused on making it not look stiff, and so it doesn't quite look right. Again, I think it's passable, and I'm really happy with the way that this drawing turned out, but I think that that's something that I could have taken a little bit of extra time to really figure out. The hair was also a little bit difficult for me because I think I talked about it in my Axel video too, like the first video of this series. Catra's hair is kind of spiky, and like, what the heck was that? Catra's hair is kind of spiky, and I draw like soft looking hair and like flowy looking hair, And I just happen to like a lot of characters where their hair isn't that. I actually think all 3 characters in this series so far had spiky hair that I had to somehow translate into my art style. I think I'm getting better at it. I think doing this series is really helping me figure out how to draw those different character traits in my style and make them look nice, so that's fun. Since the other 2 characters did have spiky hair, I think I had a little bit more experience to go off of. Plus their hair isn't like spiky, it's just like spiky. That makes no sense, but like it's still kind of long and flowy, it's just angular. I think that's what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I think I was able to make it look nice in the end. If this is the first video in this series that you're seeing, in every single picture that I made, I wanted to include the letter of the alphabet that we're on. And so obviously I needed to do a C for Catra, but then like for the other ones, I felt like the letter was more incorporated, but for this one, I don't know, I felt like the letter was really holding me back, and so I kind of just put the C on the floor near her tail, which is fine. Like, I don't know, I feel like that was just the best choice that I had, because I really liked the pose and I didn't want to change it, and there was only so many ways that I could, like, keep it consistent with the other 2. So I just did that. I don't think it looks a whole lot like a C because it's just on its side on the floor, kind of out of the way, barely noticeable, but I don't know, I think that that was probably the best thing I could have done. I don't know, let me know what you guys think, because I didn't really know what else I could do without it looking like awkward, you know? When I started doing the line art of this drawing, I got a little bit frustrated, which was annoying because I feel like I'm one of the very few people who just adores doing line art. I really like it, and I really think that line art makes the drawing pop, at least with my art style. I think that line art is kind of one of the defining features of my art style, and so if I ever start doing the line art and it doesn't turn out, it's a little upsetting. And I don't think the line art itself was bad, I just had a hard time translating my sketch to the line art. Like when I was making her face, I had a really hard time getting the proportions right in the line art, and I had a hard time getting the emotion across. Not quite sure what the issue was. I couldn't make that look right at first, and then also I realized that her ears were 2 different shapes that I had to change later. I got off to a little bit of a rough start with the line art, which is always frustrating. I hate it when that happens, but in the end I'm super happy with how the line art turned out. Since her nails are black, I decided to just include that as a part of the line art instead of outlining them and then coloring them in later. And whenever I do line art, I usually don't make it like black. I make it like a dark color. So for this one, I made it like a really, really dark red, and then like it looks black once everything is colored in, but then like on its own you can tell that it's not black. And so the nails themselves aren't exactly black, but I don't know, I just felt like since they look really solid in the show, I thought I would make them more of a solid part in here. Does that make sense? I just wanted to color them in with the line art to make them look solid. I also use the line art as an opportunity to add a little bit more dimension to things that I don't add dimension to in this sketch or the coloring. So for example, like her headpiece, you know how like with something like this where it's kind of thin, if you're looking at it, it looks pretty flat, but on the edges you can see like a little bit of a thin side to it. Instead of drawing that side, I just added like a thicker line where those would be, so it kind of gives the illusion that it's a little bit thicker than just like a piece of paper, but also it saves time and I don't have to actually draw it. And line art is one of the things that I feel like people complain about the most, and they feel like that their sketch always looks better than their line art because their line art just isn't as detailed or is like loose or whatever. But I think that this is something that can really help by adding like those like variations and adding like really dark shades in your line art. Since I love line art, I always go kind of overboard with it, I think. I add a lot of dark parts in my line art, and I do a lot of like line hatching, and I really like it, but you don't have to go as crazy as I do, but if you're struggling with line art, doing a little bit of that is something that I can definitely recommend. One thing that you'll notice with not only this piece, but a lot of fan art that I make, I don't normally use the exact colors. Like, since this is digital art, I could very easily use the eyedropper tool and then just pick the colors directly. But I don't know, for some reason, that usually doesn't translate well in my style. So like, for an example, when I was color swatching Catra, I picked the color of her hair from the show. Like just a screenshot from the show. Her hair is actually pretty green, which is something that I never noticed before. And with the style of the show, her hair just looks like a black or a very, very dark saturated brown. But I don't know, for some reason when I put it into my art style, you could just tell that it was super green, which is weird because it's the exact same color with the exact same like hair, and I don't know. I don't know what about it just makes it different, but for mine you could really tell that it was green, so I ended up having to make it more desaturated and warm for it to actually look like her hair color in my art style. And it's just stuff like that. I don't change it drastically, I just changed it enough to where like it looks good in my art style. Another thing is like the red part on her pants. I made them a little bit more purple, I think. So before I shade and add my color overlays and stuff, if you were to look at my drawing separately from the screenshot, it looks like I color swatched them, but then like when you put them together, you realize that I didn't, and that's what it is. I just changed them very subtly. I usually keep them within the same hue, except for Catra's hair. I always do that, but then I change the saturation or intensity or whatever just a little bit to make it a little bit more suiting to my art style. But yeah, I really like Catra's color palette. I feel like it's very different from what I normally pick. Her color palette is very muted and subtle, but then there's that pop of her eyes that are super bright and colorful. And I don't know, I feel like I always just do bright and colorful colors all around in my art style and just the characters that I make. And this kind of makes me want to experiment with more subtle coloring. I don't know, it's very different from what I normally do and I really like it. I also just kind of kept laughing at Catra's face when I was coloring, because the way that I color, I take one color in the drawing, usually a color that's either most prominent or relatively prominent, and then I just make a color block. Like I'll either use the lasso tool to select most of the character, use the bucket to fill it in, and then fill in the gaps later, or I'll just basically outline the line art from the inside. Doesn't make any sense, but I'll go with it. And then I'll use the paint bucket tool to fill that in, and then I'll also duplicate the line art layer, fill that in the same color, and then merge it below, so it's literally just a perfect silhouette of my drawing. And then from that, I'll preserve the opacity, and then I just fill in the colors, and it's super easy to color like that. Just the way that I colored her face, she looked a little rough, let's say. And I knew in the end it'll look okay because that's just how I color, but it was always really funny just looking back at her face. I don't know what was going on with her. She was in a mood. By the time I got to the shading, I wasn't sure what color I wanted to shade with because I always pick a color to shade with, make a couple different shades of that color, and then put a layer to multiply, and then I color. And then that's just how I do it. And it's pretty normal for me to not know what color I want to pick. And so what I do is I always start off with a very obvious color of the palette. So Catra, she has a lot of reds in her color palette, and she's just a very warm character in terms of her design. I'll pick a hue, and then I'll make different shades of that hue. And so I'll have a lighter red that's almost like a pink, and then a darker red. And then once I have all of those, I'll go to the hue and saturation adjustment bar thingy, and then I'll just play around with different hues and see what looks right. And so for this one, I ended up going with a purple, but a little bit more of a cool purple. And I think that was the best choice that I could have gotten, honestly, because purple goes nice with red, but also because of it's a cooler purple, but because of the way that I color, it kind of made everything blend nicely together, because the purple itself is a more cool purple, and so it's a nice contrast to the really warm color palette of Catra. But also, since it's on a multiply blending mode and I play around with the opacity, it's transparent, and so the cool shading merges in with her warm color palette, and I think that it just blends nicely together. It's one of my favorite parts of coloring. And when I do the highlights, I'll do a similar thing to the shading. I'll take the same color that I used for the shading, start adding the highlights, and then I'll go to the same hue and saturation bar and adjust it to a different hue. And then for highlights, one thing that I've been doing recently is making them a lighter color, so I'll make them a pink or a yellow or an orange. But for this one, I actually really liked the intense purple glow for the highlights. I don't know, I think that it suits Catra and her role and her color palette, and so I just kind of went with that. Using the same color for the shading and the highlights is something that I've been really trying to avoid, but for this one I think it's actually something that complemented the piece really nicely. For those of you familiar with my digital art, I also usually do a color overlay at the end. I think that it just adds a lot of variety in the color palette while still keeping it within a certain theme and not making it look too busy. And again, I'll use the same trick that I used before. I'll take the colors that I used for the shading, and in this case also the highlights, added colors just where I thought that they would look nice on top, and then I went to the hue and saturation and adjusted it again. And for this one I went with, again, a purple, but for this one it was more of it was very blue this time. It was like basically a blue, similar to how the cool purple that I shaded with kind of just blended in with the red because of like the technique that I used. The blue overlay really blended in nice with the reds and just kind of made it a purple, which suited like the shading and the reds and the stuff, so yeah. Yeah, this piece kind of taught me to like play with colors just a little bit more, because since Catra is a very warm like color palette, my instinct is to just go for reds or really warm purples, but like this piece just kind of shows that sometimes that's just not what you need. Sometimes you need like that contrasting color, and it just makes everything pop and look a lot better. And as always, the next steps in this drawing was to play around with the opacity of the color overlay, add some white highlights and some sort of background thing. I always like to make the color overlay at about 50% opacity. It really depends on the drawing, but it's usually somewhere between 50 and 75%, just to make the colors of the actual drawing show through a little bit more. So for the eyes, on top of everything, I just go straight white, add in those little ovals for that shine, and then I'll also normally use white for just some extra highlights here and there, but for this one, since it is so dark, I felt like it stood out too much, so instead I went with like a mid-tone gray, and I think that blended in a lot nicer. And then I just did a quick rectangle with a gradient in the background, just to add a little bit more visual interest. I feel like one thing that illustrators such as myself do a lot is to just have a character floating in a white void, which is something I am very guilty of, and something that I've done a lot in the past, but lately I've just been really trying to avoid that. And doing stuff like this is kind of like a cop-out because I don't actually have to draw a background, but also it just adds a little bit more visual interest and makes it not seem like they're just in a white void. So I just used the rectangle tool to make a rectangle, added some color gradient things, and then added a quick outline to Catra, and then boom, it's finished. I had a lot of fun drawing this. It was a lot of fun. Catra is one of those characters where she's just very identifiable in terms of both visual design and personality, and those are two things that I was really keeping in mind when I was drawing this, and I really like to think that I did her justice. Let me know what you guys think, but I'm super proud of it. I think that I actually captured her likeness, which is good, but I think I also really captured her personality in this drawing. And I'm really happy with how this drawing turned out, and I feel like I've said that so many times, but I can't help it. It's like whenever I make art that I really like, I just get excited, because whenever I draw things, I'm just like, it's okay. But then when I make something that I really love, it's just like, oh, I'm an artist. I'm getting to that point in the recording process where I'm just rambling, so I'm gonna end it here. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of this drawing, and if you like it as much as I do, or even just like it a little bit. And if you do like it even just a little bit, consider subscribing. I would really appreciate it. I draw a lot of art on my channel. Sometimes I'll post just whatever I feel like, but it's usually art. I draw fan art sometimes, but I mostly draw my own original characters, and I'm currently working on a webcomic that is going to be out in 2020, so if that's something that you're interested in, or you're looking for a new story to get into, then stick around, because hopefully you'll like my stories. Also, feel free to let me know what your favorite character whose name starts with the letter C is, and feel free to guess who my character is for the letter D. Have fun with that. You can follow me on any of my social media, which will be on screen now and linked in the description box below. I would recommend following me on Instagram, because that's where I post my art, give you guys updates on videos, host little contests, raffle art whatevers over there, and it's just generally where I'm more active, but if not, then that's fine, no big deal. And there will be a video on screen now and linked in the iCard? Yeah, the iCard. Feel free to check out some of my other stuff. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye.